World Denver Talks today with Ambassador Patrick Duddy. Ambassador Duddy, now retired from the State Department, served as ambassador to Venezuela not once but twice, and we'll hear that story in a moment. And he's also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Western Hemisphere in the State Department. Currently, he's a visiting faculty member at Duke University and teaches both in the Business School and the School of Public Policy. Welcome to World Denver Talks.
Karen, it's delightful to be here.
I wonder if you could give us some insight into President Maduro's leadership style.
I first worked with or had contact with then Foreign Minister Maduro beginning in 2007 when I arrived in Caracas and presented credentials. I think that's important as a note. He was even then serving as foreign minister and had been for 2 or 3 years at that point. So he is not inexperienced at the senior levels of government. He was foreign minister for more than 6 years and then served in the final few months of President Chavez's tenure, and as it happens, his life, he served as executive vice president to President Chavez. What I would emphasize is he was always a very loyal supporter of President Chavez and just as adamantly anti-American often as President Chavez himself was. Anti-Americanism is a central element in the sort of the Bolivarian ideology, frequently referred to as 21st century socialism. He was then and is now still extremely sensitive to perceived slights and to foreign criticism. And it's important to recognize that both during the Chavez regime and later there was a strong sense that Venezuela needed to liberate itself, that the point of the revolution was not only to change Venezuelan society, but also to free Venezuela from what the Bolivarians, which is to say Chavez, Maduro, and others, saw as the dominance of the United States. At the same time, it is worth noting that he has, in a sense, at various times expressed interest in reconstructing the relationship with the United States. And I think this is largely a consequence of the continuing economic relationship which joins our two countries. In 2012, there was a $56 billion trade relationship. So while I note that anti-Americanism is central, that sensitivity to slights has characterized both his movement and President Maduro himself. I also note that, and this I think accounts for some of the highs and lows of recent months. There's also a sense that the relationship with the United States ought to be better. And certainly both President Bush and President Obama long maintained that for all of our differences and for all of the difficulties in the relationship, we were interested in having a more productive relationship, a more functional relationship than we have in recent years been able to have.
And has it changed at all? Are we consistent on our side?
I think actually the United States, interestingly enough, having served in both the Bush administration and in the Obama administration, has been pretty consistent, first, in expressing its interest, the interest of the U.S. government, the American people, in having a more functional relationship with Venezuela. Both administrations have indicated our concern, our interest in renewing counter-narcotics cooperation, which largely ended at around 2006. We have also regularly expressed our concern for political developments in Venezuela, especially with respect to freedom of the press and freedom of expression. In a general way, I believe that most of the hemisphere would like to see the frequently bitter exchanges between the United States and Venezuela recede. That is to say, most of the hemisphere maintains decent relationships, a decent relationship with Venezuela. Many of them trade extensively with Venezuela. And of course, we are the largest investor, for many countries, the largest market, and simply an overwhelmingly important player throughout the hemisphere. And I think there are many countries in the hemisphere which would like to see an end to the period in which they have to, in a sense, negotiate around the continuing tensions between the United States and Venezuela.
So let's talk about another player, China.
When I went up to Capitol Hill for my confirmation hearing at the Senate, the very first question the senators asked me in the hearing was what I thought of China's changing, evolving, and growing role in the hemisphere. And the fact of the matter is, they are a much more significant presence in the hemisphere than ever before. They are, according to many calculations, now Brazil's largest trading partner, and they are Venezuela's largest creditor. At the same time, it's important to understand that China's interaction with the hemisphere has had many positive outcomes. Many of the countries of the Western Hemisphere, of Latin America specifically, emerged from the recent global financial crisis sooner and stronger than had been the case with earlier financial crises. And many of those same countries have, over the last decade, experienced significant growth, including success and moving many of the poor, the marginalized, those in the informal sector, into the middle class. A part of that story, beyond good macroeconomic policy, has been the development of China as a trading partner, and specifically as a market for many of Latin America's important commodities. So, are they a player in the hemisphere? Yes, they are. Is that, should we feel threatened by that? I think largely China's trade with the hemisphere is a benign phenomenon. At the same time, I've certainly heard concerns about, for instance, the fact that many of the loans China has extended to Venezuela will ultimately be repaid in oil. This poses a real challenge to the Venezuelan government, and it has excited some concern outside of Venezuela. The challenge has to do with the fact that Venezuelan oil production has been mostly stagnant for 10 years. They have been able to have something of an impact on poverty and to do some outreach based on historically high oil prices, but their actual production has improved only marginally since a strike early in the new millennium. If, in fact, a part of their production into the future is going to be used to amortize their loans to China, then they're going to have sort of less coming in by way of export dividends. And oil export dividends constitute more than 95% of all of Venezuela's export earnings, and it is estimated that those export earnings represent or are the source for between 40 and 50% of the government's budget. So Venezuela is going to have to start producing more oil if they're not going to feel a pinch as a consequence of the oil being diverted to repay loans. Others, I think, who are concerned simply because oil is going to China rather than the United States, should relax a little bit. The U.S. is producing a lot more oil than we did formerly. We're buying a lot more from Canada. We continue to buy a significant amount of oil from Mexico as well as Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And so while Venezuela continues to be an important source of oil for the United States, we are not as important, or rather Venezuela is not as important as it once was to the United States, but oil and oil revenue is of central importance to Venezuela.